Hi, welcome to this in-depth tutorial walkthrough on our X-Translate audio effect for Max for Live 11 or higher. It converts audio of any kind into MIDI in real time. To install X-Translate, open the zip after downloading. In the zip, you'll find the manual, the utilities folder, which includes Global Hub, detailed in a video at the link below, and the MFA X-Translate Max for Live file. We recommend dropping it anywhere in your user library to ensure it's ingested to all of Live's search functionality. But if you want to be specific, we would suggest putting it in your user library, presets, audio effects, Max Audio Effect folder. That's where I'll drag it now. Once there, I can search for it in the browser, and I can add it to a collection of my choice. In this case, I will put it in the Creative collection. Generative might also be appropriate. To use it in my set, I will place it on an audio track. Simply drag it to the track containing the audio that you wish to translate into MIDI. Once it's there, that's only half the battle. In order for our MIDI track to receive the MIDI, we must go to Live's in-out routing matrix and select track 1 audio as the MIDI from source. From there, you will want to ensure monitoring is set to in, or if it's in auto, you can record enable it. Live sometimes switches record enable off and on, so I prefer to use the monitor in for the most consistent results, which still allows me to record enable it when I do want to capture something. For the first example, I will look at this vocal sample here. I believe it's a simple vocal sample that comes with Live's default library, and we can listen to it now. Here we can see the waveform coming through with the detected frequency in hertz and corresponding MIDI note. And here we have the output MIDI note and velocity. Velocity corresponding to the input gain in decibels detected here. Now we can adjust the output velocity, subtracting or adding, and we can transpose the outgoing MIDI while also forcing it to a scale and key of our choosing, or configure with Global Hub if you have one in your set. While I can increase the gain here, this is strictly for interpretation purposes. The outgoing signal coming out of the X-Translate device is completely unaltered. All the settings adjusted here strictly govern how the MIDI translation occurs. I can also increase the threshold so only peaks above a certain gain amplitude threshold in decibels will be detected for pitch conversion. In the default melody mode, we have two controls here: sensitivity and resolution, which we'll examine once I activate a MIDI instrument to translate. We can also reduce the ceiling and raise the floor to create a more narrow band of frequencies to focus on for translation purposes, to avoid any rumble in the low end or any sibilance in the high end that might be confusing the translation algorithm. We'll get into more advanced properties in a moment, but I'll go to my synth track and enable this wavetable. And we are going to have to adjust quite a few settings to get it to behave properly. First of all, I want it to really follow the audio, and I've got it transposed accidentally still one semitone higher. So there we go. Now it is playing some version of the similar notes. I can click on the waveform display at any time to flush any stuck notes. Now, to get it to replicate a synth sound, more like a vocal, I'll switch it to mono mode with some glide that can emulate the glissando. I think I need to increase the sensitivity as it's not picking up all of the changes in pitch. And I can increase the resolution to take more measurements or less, which will be slightly less accurate. So I've increased the sensitivity and resolution. But if you increase the sensitivity too high, it is likely to interpret smaller perturbations in pitch as fully new notes. Now I can switch to, it looks like an A sharp minor key. And now I'll just mute the vocal and see how it's sounding on the synth. Pretty good. I'm going to enable the second oscillator, which is detuned by a fifth, and I'll turn on the filter as well. And just to re-reference with the vocals. Now, I could try to adjust my buffer size to get a little tighter. And it's more or less evenly matched with the vocals. Pretty cool. Let's try this other vocal line and see if it's still behaving. So here's what's happening. As the vocal drops down to a low register, it's going below the floor value. And so that's why it's missing those lower notes. So while you do want to remove rumble, you also don't want to remove those lower root notes. And so this has been a good example of the ceiling and floor being helpful, but also perhaps removing some important material. Too sensitive now. Now we're getting those jumps. So I'll bring those down. And I can quantize the output here. So I've got a bass rate, 16th notes, with a multiplier of 2. So it's taking 8th note samples, which is hard to hear without rhythm, but I'll just turn on the click track. Now it's 16th notes, every third 16th note. And I can have this reset in bar intervals specified here. So this is taking the impulse of that melody and reinterpreting it at a slightly different timing. I can also, of course, transpose. Maybe add a little reverb. And I can delay the output. In milliseconds by default, or with a seamless takeover to another bass rate multiplier, very flexible system. So I'm going to set this to 4/16 notes and turn the reset off at 0. And so it's all delayed by 1/16 note. But I want to take these quarter note samples of the melody and have it play every 2/16 notes or 1/8 note. And I'll increase the velocity of them as well. Maybe drop it down one more octave. So I'm using the impulse of this vocal to generate a bass line that's sort of based on it. I think it's time to look at some drums. Now, I'll simply trigger this drums clip. And X-Translate in melody mode has a bit of difficulty interpreting the noise and translating it into different notes. I'll turn the quantize off. And so instead we can use the drums mode here. The problem is the threshold is too low to detect the actual rhythmic peaks. This is quite a noisy drum loop. So I'll just increase the threshold and I'll turn the delay off by setting the delay multiplier to 0. And now we can see the light indicator showing us when the threshold is exceeded, and we can specify a particular MIDI note that will be output when threshold is exceeded. We can also specify a duration of those outgoing MIDI notes in milliseconds. I've still got the ceiling and the floor here, and the velocity I can increase. But I can also quantize this output. Again, I'll just leave it on 16th notes. So now I can mute that audio input and use that rhythmic impulse to trigger some other MIDI pattern with everything, whether I transpose the note with the dial or via the dedicated transposition, remaining within the scale and key. Now, if I'm using a rhythmic impulse for this and I want to still use the drum loop, it can be quite useful to stagger or delay the signal . So we get sort of a call and response or a bit of a Vocoding situation. Now, you might want to play with a different kind of synth sound, obviously, but this is some exciting different use cases we can look at. Now, I think it might be good to look at recording this MIDI . Now, whatever I change the root note to, it will remain in that A-sharp Aeolian. And I'm just changing some values here. So we can see how the note length and all these other values are changing in the captured MIDI clip. And if I go to the A-sharp minor scale, you'll see they all fit in. Some of the notes are long, some of them are short. As I adjusted that setting, I could also have been playing around with the threshold in real time to adjust which notes are being interpreted. Now, if I switch back to melody mode and play the vocals. Maybe we can record that. So the last example I'll give will be to use X-Translate as a real-time source. So I'm going to use the same microphone here, and I'll set the monitoring also to in and mute the input. And now you can hear the synth following my voice, or trying to at least, and there's me doing some kind of in A sharp Aeolian. Now your mind might be I can grab an instance of Vocoding. And set the carrier to be external, and select the external audio from the synth that's receiving the MIDI from X-Translate to synth. And then I can mute this, and let's hear the vocals again. Hello. So it's interpreting my voice in real time, and I'll increase the volume on the carrier and go for a more aggressive sawtooth square wave, and I'll boost the gain for translation purposes. And there we go. Real-time harmonic vocoding from X-Translate. Routing X-Translate as the MIDI source for the synth, and then that synth that's being triggered by X-Translate as the audio from source. And I can drop it an octave or two. Okay, so that's one fun example. While I'm doing that, I think it could be interesting to take another synthesizer, and for those of you who have some of our other Max for Live MIDI effects, perhaps you're familiar with Chance Engine. I'll simply place Chance Engine in generate mode, and because I failed to set global hub to the A sharp Aeolian, it did not adopt that immediately, but now it has. And so I'm going to set this to receive MIDI from one audio and set it to side mode. So it will only generate MIDI in between note off messages. And you can see it when I stop talking, begin to output MIDI. So I can create a sort of randomized conversation with myself here. I'll grab an operator, a very basic tone, and I'll make sure it's doing some interesting pitch and velocity randomization, and give it some reverb. And now we are talking, and perhaps I'll give it a shorter rate, and let's make it play more consistently so you can really hear it filling the gaps in between when I speak. I'll increase the gain on the translate a bit more so that it weights a little better between my voice. This has been a quick look at our new X-Translate device, a very powerful and creative tool that you can use on any input source, whether you're playing guitar, keys, drums, using samples, or otherwise. X-Translate should generate new ideas and open up new possibilities in the studio and on stage.